So how do we build shared understanding in a team? Here's a couple ideas for how you can get started, things you can implement tomorrow or this week to help your team get started. The first is what I call virtual tours. And this is, if you haven't already had the time to do it, this is just taking the time in a meeting to have people, a virtual meeting, to have people explain the context they're working in. This means I grab this web camera right here and I move it around the office to show you the context that I'm working in. And like I said, I'm one of the lucky ones, but you might learn a couple things about the context I work in. You may learn a couple things from looking at all of the crazy artifacts on my shelves. You might learn something about me. You might notice the little red do not disturb tab that I hang on my door to signal to my children that Daddy's giving a webinar right now. You can't just come in and ask me for the Wi-Fi password. You might learn all sorts of things if you take the time to understand the context that I'm working in. And a virtual tour speaks to that. You could do this, quick 30 seconds for everyone on your team, or you could start every meeting with one person sharing the context that they're working in and how they've stayed productive during this whole time, so that we're not only understanding the context, we're also getting best practices. The next thing you could do is you could partner people, especially those extroverts who have been really suffering over the last 9 months from a lack of peer interaction. You could partner them together for what we call work sprints. Now, this isn't a meeting. What a work sprint is I meet up in a virtual call, so Zoom call, Microsoft Teams, some video call with a colleague, and we exchange a few pleasantries. Hi, how are you doing? Talk about the day, but then we get to work, solo work. We just know that the other person is there. This is similar to how, if we went to university, how we would often have group studies where we would go out together or go to the library and sit 4 people across the table and not really talk all that often, but work around each other. Work sprints do that because it makes it more likely that when you're working on something and you need help, you at least ask that person instead of typing out an email to the individual leader, and we get the team used to interacting with each other the way they used to do when we were co-located. So work sprints speaks to that. It's also, I've learned over time as I've tried to put into practice what I found from my research, it's also a great way to stay productive, because I found that if you're struggling to balance family and work life, it's hard to find time to go off and work on a project solo when your family's around you and needs you. But if they know you have a call that you have to be on, they leave you alone. So the idea of a call just so that you can work on that thing you would work on individually can actually keep you incredibly productive. And the last thing I'll say around shared understanding is the idea of holding office hours. This is something you as a leader need to be doing right now, but also something you want to be encouraging your people to do. Office hours just means there's a dedicated block of time on the calendar. Maybe it's every Wednesday afternoon. Maybe it's every Thursday morning. It doesn't matter when it is, but it's a time that I'm available for spur of the moment questions, for quick appointments. It's not time that has to be scheduled. It's time that you can call my phone, or the time that I'm actually just open on a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams call and anybody can drop in. But it's time that I've set aside to be responsive to you. It's sort of the virtual version of the open door policy that we used to encourage a lot of leaders to have in a co-located environment. I was a full-time business school professor for 10 years. I'm still part-time now. And office hours are one of the most useful meetings I have on a regular basis, because a student will come in with one question, and inevitably what happens? We end up talking about a lot of different things. We end up talking about the bigger question behind that question. We talk about their hopes, their career goals, etc. And in a company, the same thing happens. When people come in for a 2 to 3 minute question, what ends up happening is a 10 to 15 minute conversation that bonds you two together much more. And so as a leader, office hours is something you need to be open for right now. You can decide how you schedule them. It can be being on the Zoom call waiting for people to come in. It can be, here's a block of time that I'm deliberately keeping open for people to call my cell phone, or even just send me text messages, whatever it is. But it needs to be a time that you announce to your people right away. And then a few weeks later, as it's working, and as you figure out what works best for your team, maybe encourage a couple other people on your team to hold office hours as well.